Joining me now is Professor Sumit Ganguly, a political scientist from Indiana University in the US. Thanks for your time, Professor. Let's start with these attacks in neighbouring Sri Lanka. How much impact will they have on the Indian election campaign?
They'll probably have some impact in the southern state of Tamil Nadu, where there is a substantial Tamil population and a substantial Christian population also. It could also have some impact in other parts of India, particularly since Prime Minister Modi has sought to make this electoral fodder by suggesting that only his party is capable of effectively dealing with and defeating terrorism in the region.
And as you just said there, this election has been seen as a referendum on Modi's 5-year rule. He's very much adopted a nationalist pitch, trying to win the majority Hindu votes by projecting a tough stance against, say, Pakistan and so on. Do you think, however, his approach is actually working with voters?
It's extremely difficult to tell because Indian voters have become extremely sophisticated, having gone through a range of national elections, and they understand the power of the franchise. And consequently, often they do not reveal their preferences in the pre-election polls, and instead they frequently turn to local issues when they vote. So while they may express some public admiration for Modi, ultimately the election will really be decided, I believe, on sort of much more bread and butter issues which affect their immediate lives rather than the starring figure of Prime Minister Modi.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because I think people outside of India tend to view the country as one homogenous group. But the reality is it's made up of many different ethnic minorities, and people are much more likely to think of themselves as Tamil or Bengali first before thinking of themselves as Indian as such. So again, how does that affect Modi's message?
Well, they certainly may think of themselves as having a regional identity, but they do identify quite strongly with the Indian state. That said, more local, regional issues frequently come to the fore in Indian elections. And while Modi can make these nationalist appeals, ultimately people will make decisions on the basis of whether their lives have been significantly improved under this regime over the course of the last 5 years. Those kinds of issues are much more likely to shape electoral outcomes rather than grand national appeals and jingoistic statements on the part of Prime Minister Modi.
Now, let's talk about his leading opponent. That's Rahul Gandhi of the famed Gandhi dynasty, and his Congress party is very much trying to form alliances with regional parties to stop Modi. Is he actually succeeding?
It's not entirely clear. He's certainly been successful in terms of forging these alliances. Whether or not these alliances ultimately will come to fruition is another matter altogether. Rahul Gandhi has not proven himself, at least in prior elections, to be a particularly effective campaigner. On this election, he seems to be a bit more sure-footed than in the past. But ultimately, as the old expression goes, that it's the taste of the pudding is in the eating. And we don't really know whether or not his seeming appeal in the latest electoral rallies will ultimately translate into votes.
From where you're standing, Professor Ganguly, and I mean, you've been talking there about how domestic issues are being seen as the important issues in this campaign. Is it possible to predict who is likely to win as a result?
Most of the polling seems to suggest that Prime Minister Modi will probably, and his party, will probably end up winning again, but with a diminished majority, or if a majority at all. They may emerge as the single largest party in parliament, but may be forced into a coalition to be able to actually assume the position of governing the country. So much of the polling seems to suggest that they will lose a certain number of seats because the sheen seems to have come off his party and of him in particular.
Professor Sumit Ganguly there from Indiana University, thank you for your time.